Welcome to Case by Case. We want to just take a moment and remind you that this content is intended for adult audiences. It is created for educational and informational purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised, as discussions may include references to real criminal cases, violence, and other sensitive and potentially distressing topics. While we strive to present every case with accuracy and respect those involved, the material may not be suitable for all viewers. Please proceed thoughtfully. And remember, if you need to take a step back, if you find something that concerns you, if you find it to be triggering and you need to take a step back, please do. You can join us whenever you're ready to come back. We'll leave the light on. Welcome back to Case by Case. Today we are recapping day 4 of the trial of Colin Gray. He is the father of the school shooter Colt Gray here in Georgia, and it took place in Barrow County, Georgia. A lot of interesting information came out today. We got to see a video of a police officer going and speaking with the dad and with Colt. So we got to see a little bit of body language from Colt. We also got to hear from a lot of social workers, a number of social workers that tried to get services provided to Colt. We heard from a number of faculty at the school and administrative who tried to reach the parents of Colt to try to get him some help and find out why he wasn't in school. And something interesting that we found out, this all happened when he was in the first couple of days of his 9th grade year. What's interesting is there were no records for his 8th grade year. Although when he was enrolled in 9th grade, they were requiring those records and they kept asking for them. And the father said that it was he was homeschooled and he was on a homeschool program. So as a result, that's what they were looking for. But there were witnesses that testified that in spite of looking for that, there were no records for that. So let me dive in. So one of the things that happened is there were a number of people that tipped in a comment that was made on Discord. Now, if you're not familiar with Discord, it's like a chat where you can have groups on their individual servers. They're called servers, and you can create your own server and pull over whoever you want so that you can have a number of people that you want communicating about the same subject. It's really popular in gaming communities. A lot of the games use it. It's also very popular in the creative industry. Photographers often use it. Artists use it because it's an easy way to have a conversation with a number of people and share information quickly. So the tip that came in against this person, we're not going to say it's Colt, but this person, was a comment that he was going to do a school shooting. Now, if you have been around the internet for any period of time in the last 10 years, you know that if you make comments like that, it's going to get reported by someone and probably multiple people. So the investigator or the officer had been given this information, and he was tasked with going out to the family home and speaking with the father and Colt, because obviously if someone made a statement like that, you got to follow up. That could be a really big warning flag. Here's what I observed. I thought that when the officer went out and he asked the questions, first of all, he went and he spoke to the father. The father was, you know, he had no problem bringing Colt outside. So the three of them stood on the steps and talked, or the porch and talked. The problem that I saw is it was so casual. I believed, I mean, it almost seemed like they were sitting down having a cup of coffee or something. There was no, well, you know what? Let me take a look around and just make sure things are okay. Because think about it. If he really made a statement like that, and if he was the kid, now he claimed that his Discord account was hacked. And we can all call BS on that. But Discord does get hacked. Discord accounts do get hacked. But the fact that he made a comment about a school shooting and then later there was a school shooting that he did, that's a little sus. So the officer goes out and he's asking him about this, and the father brings Colt out, and Colt comes out and says, no, the account was hacked. Now, the audio on this recording was atrocious. You could barely understand what they were saying. But the bottom line is, Colt was denying that it was him. And the father was basically saying, hey, we go hunting, he's around guns, but you tell me that this was him and the guns are gone. Well, hindsight's 20/20, of course. But I gotta say, if my boys had come, if the police had come to our door and accused one of the boys of making a statement like that, and one of the boys said, no, I didn't do it, it was hacked. I don't care what they said. I don't care what the circumstances were. The guns would not be accessible. Now, I don't think the guns should have been accessible anyway, but I also grew up in a household where there were 5 of us kids, and we all knew where my dad's guns were, and none of us bothered him. None of us. We never said, let's go get his gun and go out. We never threatened one another. It wasn't even a thought. And believe me, we had some knockdown, drag-out fights in that house, the siblings. And, there was a lot of frustration in our family dynamics. So I say that I would have the guns put up because when our boys were growing up, we didn't have the guns sitting out. The guns were in a safe, and they weren't just in a safe. They were behind a locked concrete door type, not concrete door, but metal door, and then a safe. I mean, we weren't going to take a chance on one of our kids' friends coming over and saying, hey, man, let's check out this. That wasn't going to happen. Because sometimes it's not your kids you got to worry about. It's who they bring home. And they're inquisitive. They're all curious, and no one thinks, even in situations where someone gets hurt by accident, they don't think that's going to happen. But in this case, you've got the police walking up to the father, knocking on the door and saying, these tips were called in. How many tips were called in? Well, he testified that there were at least 3. So I don't think it was handled properly from that standpoint. But of course, this is hindsight. And, maybe the police felt like they did everything they could. Now, I will say that the father did say, you let me know when you find out what is going on here. They did do an investigation, and they found something about it was in Russian, or the account was in Russian. And so they really didn't feel like they could attribute it to Colt. They didn't feel like that was his. and they couldn't corroborate that he made the threat. So they kind of just moved on. But the problem becomes when you hear later testimony, those people were never made aware of this threat being called in and the potential that it could have been Colt. And it's another one of those situations like if you followed the Nicholas Cruz shooting down in Parkland, there were many, many warning signs. Many were called in, and there were people that just missed them. They missed this little warning, or they didn't put it together with another warning, or people dismissed it as he's just an odd kid, or people dismissed it as he's a mean kid, but they never put all of this together. Well, in this situation, what we find out through testimony today is that there were times, and they don't share this conversation with us, but there were conversations between Colt and a social worker at one point. And Colt must have been asking for help because the social worker testified that they continued, not one social worker, but two of them, that they continued to try and get the father to, contact them back so they could get started on the services for Colt. The other thing that we found out about, teachers were having a lot of problems getting in touch with parents related to Colt's absences at school. And that's one reason they could not track down his 8th grade records, which we find out there were no 8th grade records. So that means he went to school in 7th grade. He had a lot of absences. So it's hard to know how much he really learned, right? And then he jumped a year later into 9th. What did he do for that whole year? What happened that whole year that he was gone? And we may find out in some future testimony, but right now, that's just kind of a mystery. One of the other things that I thought was interesting was, let me see, I'm looking at my notes here. Okay, yes, so he missed the entire 8th grade. And there were times when the school could not even locate the parents to communicate what was going on. One of the things that happened is the mother apparently tested positive. She must have been on probation. It's best I understand it. She was under the care of someone, and she tested positive for some substance. And as a result, the kids all were removed from her and given back to the dad, Colin. And that included Colt. Now, there were apparently phone conversations, and they did enter the records into evidence today, but we've not seen a lot of content from them. But it was an interesting day for the real insight into a couple of things. Nobody was making this kid attend school. And even though he got a couple of suspensions for it, there doesn't seem to be like anything was taking place from the home side of things, because there was testimony from one of the, I don't know if I think she was with school services. She went out, or she might have been with DFACS, which in Georgia, that's Department of Family and Children's Services. She might have been with DFACS, but this lady went out. She made numerous phone calls over and over and over and sent emails. And they even sent certified mail and got no responses. They even had Colt call his dad and couldn't get in touch with him. So it kind of makes you wonder, what was going on in this family dynamic that, this kid, if there'd been an emergency, they couldn't even get in touch with him. At any rate, this social worker is supposed to lay eyes on the person that is the subject of their services. So she had to go out to see the father and the son in their environment. But at one point, she couldn't even find them and went out there, and the entire house was empty except for a ladder inside. So, you know, I can imagine that the family was going through significant turmoil. There was a divorce. There was substance abuse on the mom's part. The kids were back and forth. You know, they were in school, out of school. Nobody's paying attention to this or that or the other. But if you're going to have kids in your care, you got to make sure that you return phone calls, especially to the school. When the boys were growing up, I can tell you now, when the school called, I don't care what I was doing. I dropped everything. Because you don't know if there's an emergency. Did one of the kids get hurt? You know, did one of them get sick and I need to go get them? You know, there were a couple of times it was, you know, injuries related to football. But the point is, if you can't get in touch with the caregiver, how can you possibly feel comfortable about that kid going back to that home when this kid's telling you that he needs some help and he's reaching out and you can't even get his dad to give it the help to him? So I think that the prosecution did a good job today. There were some good defense moments. Nothing monumental, but there were some good things about how, you know, when you talk to him, when you talk to the father, Colin, he agreed immediately. And when you went out and saw him about that tip on the shooter on Discord, he immediately brought his son out. He told you to follow up. And all of those things are true, and they're good because they mitigate the situation where it's like this guy should have seen it coming, and he gave his kid a gun anyway. Now, one thing that did not come up today is that shrine to the school shooter that he allegedly had on his wall, that Colt allegedly had on his wall. So I'm wondering, when the officer went out there to ask about the comment on Discord, if he had gone in the house, would he have seen that? Was that fixation already established? Did he already have that up on his wall? Or did that come later after he got the gun that his father gave him for Christmas? But it's interesting when you see all of these dates because there's just so many things that happen, and it's like no one was paying attention to what was going on in this kid's life. I'm going to look through my notes real quick and just make sure there's not anything that okay, let's see. They did show the video also at the beginning of the day. They showed the video where the officer went to the home and was talking to the dad, but the volume was not very good, so it was hard to really know what they were saying. But this is what he did say. Let's see. I'm reading my notes here. He says, I was only made aware that there had been an active shooter incident in which multiple people had been injured, was unsure of the victims, how many were deceased, unsure how, what the address was, or if active threats had been, the persons had been detained, or where they were. And the prosecutor says, so you didn't know if anybody had been arrested? He said, no, I didn't know if anybody had been arrested. So they sent him to the residence. And it's about 30 minutes after he got into the county, because he was apparently somewhere else doing a training or something. And he says that they knocked on the front door. They went to the side entrance to the garage, the carport area. And the garage door opened, and, or it might have been a door, but it was kind of more of a carport, he clarifies. And he says that the dad comes out the garage door. And they say, did you say anything to him when he came out? I explained who we were, and we were there with the sheriff's department, and he was not free to leave at that time. Did he say anything? Did you ask him any questions? Initially, no. Did he say anything to you? Along the lines, if he knew something had occurred, his daughter had he knew something had occurred. His daughter had sent him a text saying the school was on lockdown, and he was hoping it wasn't his son. They asked him questions about what was in the house. Yes. What did you ask him? They asked if there were people, animals, and weapons. And he told me there were no other people, no other animals. There were 2 firearms located in the residence. So basically they kept him there, and then you see on the video all of these other people arriving and all these SUVs coming up. And let's see what else. There wasn't really anything major there. One thing he did say in that meeting was that something about his son had said, this is the best I understood it, that his son had said, even if you try to give me counseling, the kids laugh at me at school, so we're going to do online school. And then after a year, they brought him back in doing the regular school this year, and he seemed to be going okay. The father says, we reached out to the school and said, hey, y'all got counselors, we wanted to check in. And he said he filled out some paperwork for a counselor that would get involved. And, we hear from the counselors later that there was no follow-up. There was no way for them to do anything. They couldn't get him to do anything. So then they brought in a person with school records. We talked about that. And that's the one where they couldn't find the 8th grade records. They also showed how many days he had missed, and emails that the school was asking for his immunization records and couldn't get them. Let's see. And I think that was pretty much it today, I believe. Now the state did say that Marcy Gray, the mother, is going to testify. I don't know what day she's going to testify, but she's testifying apparently for the state. So that should be interesting. There were a couple of emails where I'm just trying to make sure I give you guys a full recap. There were a couple of emails that were shown by the counselors at the school. The times they did get in touch with the dad, where he basically said, yes, he's doing great, everything's fine, he seems to be doing well, and adjusting well since his mother and I split up. So there's definitely some shade being thrown there, and I don't know if maybe the dad was just going through this emotional turmoil and not paying attention to what the kid was doing. So that's the recap for today, and that's pretty much it. I mean, they ended it today with, who did they end it with today? I think they ended it with a records guy today. Oh yeah, they introduced a lot of emails. The guy that talked about pulling the emails talked about how it was like 70,000 pages for one group of them. So obviously they didn't enter all of that, but they did enter some of these things, and they said that they would be going through those notebooks with a different witness, but they were laying the foundation with this guy. So we'll see what happens from now on. But, a couple people have written me and asked where I stand on this. Well, so far I haven't seen enough proof that the dad, because we haven't even seen the proof that he bought the gun yet. That's just things we've heard about, but we haven't seen it in court. So we don't have the evidence of him buying the gun yet. We don't have evidence that the gun was actually sitting around his room in spite of all of these warnings. Now, all of that was in the opening statements for the prosecution. But until we see that entered into evidence, we don't really know. So right now, I can see where there is the parents did seem to be negligent in caring for him and giving him the things he needed. But right now, I don't see the tie to charging this father. But I think that that'll come in time. They've proved all the elements to the crime itself, the crimes that Colt committed, because they had to do that to charge the dad. So they've done all that and laid all of that down. But we'll see what happens. It was an interesting day. It was just a lot of data. So this is Case by Case, and I appreciate you listening